welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. Carrie, Arizona went viral with a running javelina.
Which everyone keeps calling pigs.
The poor, I'm like, have you not read the book? Don't call me a pig. Come on.
No, nobody knows outside of Arizona knows what a javelina is. And it does kind of look like a pig, although when it's running, it looks way less like a pig than normal.
Right? Because pigs don't run that fast, do they?
Oh, they probably do. Well, at least the smaller ones probably do. Yeah. I was shocked, though, when I saw that javelin boot it like that. I was like, how? How? Because I've only ever seen them amble.
Oh, okay.
At most.
No, I've been semi-chased by a javelina. It wasn't going that fast. Because I was taking my trash out, and boy, did they love the smell of trash. But yeah, no, I've mostly seen them with their little babies and, like, you know, like falling along, just ambling along, very cute, like. But it's, if you haven't seen it, go to the Twitter account, Javelina Running too. You can see just the Javelina running to all sorts of hilarious, perfectly matched songs. Like Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen or Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. It's beautiful.
My favorite is Going the Distance by Cake. It's also the first one that I saw, so I'm a little biased, but yeah.
Well, I also feel like for some reason that song is so funny to me, just by itself.
Because he sounds so unconcerned, like he doesn't give a shit while he's singing. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, maybe that's what it is. Oh, that is perfect.
It was nice, a little bit of lightheartedness. It felt kind of like 2015 when we had both the dress and the escaped llamas. It was a wild, wild day, and so the javelina running was not quite the same, but it felt a little bit more like, oh, remember the good old times and the before times.
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Well, the internet was not just people yelling at each other about their favorite candidate and how every other candidate sucks.
I know. Well, now I'm like Javelina 2020. Running Javelina 2020.
Frankly, it couldn't possibly do a worse job than what's happening right now.
It's true. Speaking of our fucked up government, we did a bonus episode, which you can get to by being a Patreon supporter, about this new change in Social Security disability benefits. And they changed a language requirement. So
it's definitely a good bonus to access.
I mean, it's just a rage bonus, which, you know, I would say about 80% of them are rage bonuses. Maybe we could all stop being assholes and we wouldn't have to rage bonus, but...
Well, I mean... Yes. It seems like it's unlikely that the government's ever going to stop being this level of asshole anytime soon.
Yeah. On a lighthearted note, I rewatched Knives Out, the movie, and I just truly, the first time, because one of my favorite things is just like old haunted looking mansion houses and like murder, like a Clue type vibe. So I was just like enthralled by all of that and somehow missed some of the language stuff. But the character that Toni Collette plays, they make her very much sound like a very stereotypical Valley girl. Yeah. And she's like, there's no evidence to prove that she spends any time there.
No, I mean, Valley Girl is not about being from the Valley anymore. It hasn't been for a long time.
I mean, I guess I spend most of my time toward the West Coast, that I was surprised, because it's supposed to be Massachusetts, but it's like, it's on brand Valley Girl, that I'm like, she sounds like no one around her.
Well, we don't know where she came from, right?
That's true. Okay, well, and they do make her into basically like a Gwyneth Paltrow.
Exactly, I was going to say she's very goopy.
Yeah, so, I mean, that is really calling on that kind of vibe, or that, at least, stereotype, of the wellness.
Yeah.
You know, like, they show her meditating in this very, like, yeah, she definitely has this vibe. I mean, it's not unfair to say that LA is kind of an epicenter for that kind of stuff.
Oh, no, it's 100% is.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't even really matter. Like, she might not be from there at all. She might just be adopting that because that's who that's her identity, right?
Her brand.
Her
I mean,
brand.
it's definitely literally her brand at whatever company she has. So,
yeah, no, she's really good in that movie. And that
she is so good.
I mean, she's always amazing because she's just amazing. But there's just something really entertaining about that character, like the languidity with which she speaks, and
yeah,
and the ridiculousness of most of the things that come out of her mouth.
Yeah. Oh, she embodies that character. It's amazing. Because you see her, like, I mean, the last thing I saw her in was a serious role, and I'm like, she definitely did. You know, it's just like, the range. Speaking of range, I am enthralled by Daniel Craig's character. Like, I was the first time. But he does that thing where it's kind of like, well, fuck Kevin Spacey, but the Kevin Spacey House of Cards.
Yeah, he's Frank Underwood, sort of, except except that a detective and probably actually a better person. But yeah, he's definitely adopting this like Charleston-ish accent that's no one speaks anymore. Like, it's a really old school variety.
And I don't know if anyone ever asked, like, the director or anyone if that was on purpose, but I feel like it had to have been. Like, I feel like thought was put into making him seem like this old school kind of dude.
Yeah, I assume it was on purpose. I haven't heard anyone ask Rian Johnson about that choice, because I've heard him talk about, Knives Out. Daniel Craig's character putting on this accent really, like, just putting it on really strong, because he wants people not to take him seriously. Because he's kind of Columboing. Wow. Right? Yeah. Like, that's the kind of character he feels like. He feels like he's bumbling, but he's not. He knows exactly what he's doing the whole time. Spoiler alert. But like, yeah, I don't know. So it could have been a choice that the character even made. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, like, when he kind of reveals at the end that he knew what he was doing the whole time, I was like, you're fucking shitting me. Because you seemed like you didn't know what you were doing. So, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fucking fun movie.
Oh my god, it is so fun.
Yeah.
I was just, like, grinning watching that movie. Because, like, I enjoy murder mysteries. I always have. I grew up on them. Yeah. But there was just something so, like, fun about this one, because it kind of turns everything up on its head.
It's super, like, all of the references are very up to date. Like, you're like, this movie is obviously made in 2019.
Yes.
So, anyway, lots of fun language stuff. And today's episode's fun.
Yeah. Yes.
We want to gift our listeners with things that aren't always very, very sad.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously a little bit of sadness associated with names. Sure. So we do talk a little bit about, sort of the dark side of names. But for the most part, it's more fun stuff. Like, why you can sort of tell what era someone's born.
Yeah.
By their name.
People should let us know on Twitter or wherever about their names or their name stories. That'd be really fun.
On Anchor, you can record a voicemail for us if you wish. So if you let's maybe do it. Let's do a show where people call in. You can talk about your name or whatever. Anything you find interesting. But I think names are fun.
Well, names, I mean, I think, like talking about in the episode, everyone has a story about their name. Probably a million. But yeah, so if you want to share that with us, that would be great. And how do you get to that, Carrie?
So you can add a message at anchor.fm/the-vocal-fries.
Yes, leave us a voicemail and enjoy this episode.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So today we are joined by Dr. Laurel McKenzie, who is an assistant professor at NYU, who studies the variability inherent in language. She's interested in the linguistic choices we make and how and why we make them. The goal of her research is to better understand the patterns that underlie variation and change in language. But we have her here today to talk about names.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
I say here as if we're all in the same space, but it's really just the same virtual space.
We're in the same cyberspace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Cyber.
No, good word, right? Let's bring it back.
So yeah, we wanted to talk to you about names. I believe it was Daniel Curry Hall who wanted us to talk about names.
So this was a request.
This was a request, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we didn't know who to turn to, and I think Lisa Davidson told us to talk to you. So
yeah, I can tell you a little bit about why and how I'm interested in names.
Perfect.
Well, I don't know if there's a reason for why I'm interested in it, but I have always sort of, as someone with a name that you can't find on keychains and mugs, I guess I was always kind of aware of names growing up, and I think it might actually have been Bill Labov, who was my PhD thesis advisor, who sort of introduced me to the academic literature on names. Bill had grown very interested in sort of questions about how innovations in language catch on and progress and propagate through a community. And he found a line of research by the sociologist Stanley Lieberson about how innovations in fashion catch on and propagate through a community. And Lieberson particularly investigated this with respect to names. And the anecdote that Lieberson told was that he named his daughter Rebecca, thinking, oh, that's a nice, interesting, unusual name. And then Rebecca got to kindergarten and was Rebecca L because there were 3 other Rebeccas in the class. And Labov had the exact same experience, also naming his daughter Rebecca at around the same time as Lieberson. So Labov was really struck by this and told this anecdote a few times. And the question it raised for him was like, what's going on? Why do so many people pick the same name at the same time, but not at other times? What is it about certain names that are trendy temporarily, but not at other times? And how do people who don't talk to each other about, what are you naming your kid? What are you naming your kid? Nonetheless, pick the same names. Labov saw an analog in that, the way names go in and out of style, in and out of fashion, to the way sound changes in language and changes in language more generally go in and out of style and in and out of fashion.
Brilliant.
I know.
So brilliant. I mean, the way some people's brains work.
Yep.
Is so fascinating to me.
That's Bill's brain. Bill is like the galaxy brain on the galaxy brain meme.
Yeah.
That you never would have put together. So that clued me into the fact that there's an academic literature on names. And at around the same time, when I was in grad school, so like mid-2000s, 2006, 2008 or so, there was this blog that came into being, The Baby Name Wizard, and the author, Laura Wattenberg, was a social scientist, a quantitative social scientist, and she had downloaded all the Social Security data on names given to babies in the United States going back to the 1880s. And she had put it into a searchable database with graphs, so you could search for a name like Brian and see the rate at which Brian was given to babies from 1880 up to the present day. So you could see trends go in and out of fashion. You could search for just the beginning of words, the beginning of names. So you could see all the BR names, Brian, Brady, Brianna, Brittany, which are like very 80s, 90s era sort of sounding names. And that was really fun. So I enjoyed playing around with that. And then it all sort of came together my final year of my PhD program when I was on the job market. And I applied for a job at the University of Manchester, where I was asked to propose 3 new courses at each level of the undergrad curriculum. So anyone listening to this who might want to go on the academic job market one day, be prepared that this is the kind of thing that people might ask you about. So I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. It's a little exercise in like teaching creativity. And the hardest part for me was figuring out what to teach first-year undergraduates, because it had to be something new that was not on the course curriculum already. So it couldn't just be like Introduction to Phonetics, Introduction to Sociolinguistics, but also it had to be appropriate for students who didn't have much background in linguistics. So I kind of mulled over this for a long time, and it came to me one day as I was brushing my teeth. What about the linguistics of names? I like names. You can talk about how names go in and out of fashion, but you can also talk about things like the phonology of nickname formation or the morphology of naming in cultures that have interesting morphological systems. You can talk about gender in naming. You can talk about sound symbolism in naming, the way that researchers have found that certain product names might sound more rich and creamy or more crunchy based on the sounds that they have in them. So the more I thought, the more I was like, you kind of could fill like a 1-semester undergraduate course on the linguistics of names. So I proposed that. And I ended up getting the job, and in my offer letter, they said, next semester, you will be teaching linguistics of names. And I was like, oh, God. So this had to go from like a 30-second, you could do this, to like a genuine 1-semester course in a very short amount of time. So I had to really put my money where my mouth was and read all this literature on the linguistics of names, but like there is a fair amount of it out there. I taught that course for 3 semesters at Manchester, and it was very popular among the undergrads. It was a lot of fun to teach, and I put it all together in that article for the teaching linguistics section of Language, on the hopes that it might help other people.
Do you still teach it at NYU? Or?
Haven't taught it here at NYU, no. Yeah, I would like to bring it back one of these days. I think it would make a good freshman seminar.
Yes,
absolutely.
That's like the kind of level it's appropriate for. Yeah.
Well, the reason why it's so good that we're talking to you about names, and the reason why this is such a successful class, I'm guessing, is because we all care so deeply about our own names.
Yeah.
Either we were like, we really hated it growing up, or whatever. We just have lots of big feelings about our names. I can imagine you as a little girl going by the mugs and seeing Lauren and being like, oh, there's Lauren, and there's Laurel should be. But, I did the same thing where I was like, at a certain period, Megan was being spelled with H a lot. So, like, my name, like Megan, M-E-G-A-N, would be, like, missing, but they still have the H ones. And I'm like, it's not the same thing. I can't just buy that mug.
Scribble it out.
Just cross out the H.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a viral tweet a while ago, something like every name has a natural enemy or a natural nemesis or something. And it was by like a guy named Josh, and he was like, mine is John or something. What's yours? And it was really fun to see all the racks of responses that accumulated.
Yeah. Carrie's would be just Carrie spelled the other way, right?
No, mine is Karen.
Oh, yeah.
Because it gets misheard as Karen a lot. Pretty recently, I went to a Starbucks and she asked for my name and I said Carrie, and she misheard it as Karen, and I was like, that's fine, because who cares, right?
Yeah.
And so she was like, oh, I got it wrong. And then she put down Anna. And I was like, what?
But so you mentioned the Brady, Brittany, Brian sounding very 80s. Is there actually literature, or were you able to track that the bruh sound was very popular at that time?
You can actually go look up the baby name Voyager.
That was the wizard?
That's that website I was telling you about. It's still there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the baby name Wizard was, I think, that's the name of the website, and the Voyager is the part where it's the search engine, basically, where you search through all the data.
So my impression is Brian is at least somewhat older, because I know older Brians, but Brittany for sure.
So many
I don't
Britneys
remember hearing any
yeah.
Britneys until the 80s.
Okay, so I just typed it in, and the peak is definitely right at the 1990s, and some of the names, the most popular names that are showing up are Brandon, Bradley, Brittany, Brianna, Brian spelled a couple days, Brian with a Y, Brian with an I. Brooke is in here. Bruce. Like, there's others, but
Bruce.
A big peak.
My uncle's name is Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce to me doesn't seem to show. Yeah, that peaked in the 50s.
Yeah.
Bruce is a slightly different trajectory.
My mom's name is Charlotte, which sounds so old school to me, except then
it's coming back.
Yeah, the Princess Charlotte over in
Charlotte came back.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, cycles, right? That's one of the things you looked at.
Yes, so that was something that I learned from reading Lieberson. Yeah, so he looks at sort of these roller coaster type patterns where names that were really common in the 1880s, 1890s, turn of the century get recycled. And his theory is that those names get kind of imbued with an old-fashioned feeling when they're the names of your parents and grandparents. But once all the old Charlottes have sort of died off, they lose those connotations and they're ripe for being revitalized in a way. That doesn't hold for everything, right? So like, I don't think Ethel is coming back.
No,
some of these.
or Doris.
Right. Yeah, but a lot of them. So Emma, I think, is a
Yes.
very similar trajectory. Yep, I'm looking at it in the Voyager right now. It shows a real like trough and then a massive peak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All the FL starting names. So I just typed in FLA. So you get Flora, Florence, Flossie, Floyd. Those have all just tanked, and they're not really coming back. Although you never know.
Never
Florence,
know. Florence is a little bit
know.
nicer than Doris, so maybe.
Yeah.
So you've already sort of answered this, but like, maybe you can delve into like one area that you think is the most interesting. Like, so what can we learn studying names?
Yeah, so I designed my undergrad course around a single question, which was whether names behave like other elements of language or whether names are somehow linguistically special. And from a lot of perspectives, names do actually seem a lot like other elements of language. Phonologically, they behave very similarly. So, for instance, nouns in English tend to be trochaic. They have stress on the first syllable, and most of the names in English do too, or at least the disyllabic ones. Names follow similar processes of hypochoristic formation. So the way we make nicknames, we use very similar processes when we make kind of nicknames or play names of non-name words. And so there's a lot of phonological literature on when you make a nickname, what part of the name do you chop off, basically?
Is this in English?
Yeah, in English at least, but other Germanic languages and French as well has specific nickname formation patterns that are followed by names, but also can be done to non-name words, I think. Yeah, so those were similarities, but I thought the sociolinguistic similarities were really interesting too, because names are a lot like accents, right? So you're brought up with them, they're kind of bestowed upon you. They're not necessarily something you choose, and they can be really hard to change. And they can carry hallmarks of somebody's ethnic background, their social class background, their gender, certainly, and they're subject to kind of taste and fashion in the same way that changing elements of language can be.
Also, I bet we're seeing a spike in sort of like gender nonconforming names right now. So kind of those vague names.
It's an interesting question. Yeah. So there's a fair amount of literature on the phonological correlates of names given to babies of different genders, different sexes, right? So researchers have found, again, in English and using data in the US, although I suspect the UK would be really similar, that names given to babies assigned female at birth tend to be longer. They tend to have more syllables. They tend to be more likely to end in a vowel, specifically schwa, right? Think of like Amanda, Rebecca, those sorts of things. And they tend not to have stress on the initial syllable compared to names given to babies assigned male at birth. So that's again like Amanda, Rebecca, Marie. One exercise that I had my students do was to look at whether names have become less likely over time to show these gender hallmarks, like have names given to baby boys gotten more quote unquote feminine in their phonology and have names given to baby girls gotten less feminine. What we actually found is that both sets of names seem to have had more phonological correlates associated with femininity over time, at least in the US data, which is a little surprising.
I've also heard that boys' names tend to end in "n," like Brandon and
That's
Aiden.
a huge spike. Yep. Yeah. So boys' names used to end more in obstruents. Yeah, so your hard consonants, stops, and fricatives and things. And now there's been a big rise in N final baby names. Yeah, and part of that I noticed in digging through the data is that there's been a big spike in a lot of rhyming names. So Aiden became popular in like in early 2000s, I think. And then we see this massive influx of Braden, Zayden, Jaden, Raiden, Hayden, Caden, spelled a couple of different ways, seemingly all on the model of Aiden. Yeah, so that's probably beefing up the number of N final boys' names.
I wonder if that's kind of like just the whole Lauren and Laurel thing, if that's just a little bit different than Aiden. Like maybe it'll be a little bit more unique. But then it just so happens that since it's similar to Aiden, that other people were thinking the same thing. And so it kind of starts trending.
This is exactly what Lieberson says, the sociologist Stanley Lieberson, about how innovations in taste and fashion catch on. They catch on because they're just a tiny little bit different from what was popular before. They're not so different that they feel threatening, but they're different enough that they can seem a little bit, innovative or interesting. And he makes the analogy to skirt lengths changing over time, actually. And he tracked this in, I think, ads in fashion magazines over the course of the 20th century. Skirts got much, much, much shorter, and then they worked their way longer again, but it was only by tiny little increments. It was never a massive jump.
That's so fascinating.
I know.
That is really fascinating.
If you see which names are popular, you can sort of trace like Jason to Jacob to Mason to Aiden among the top most popular boys' names. They're all like phonologically similar, but not identical. Yep. It's really neat.
That is really neat.
Another thing I learned in researching names is that there are countries and cultures where naming is very government regulated. Your name has to be on a list, and those lists have assigned genders with them too. So there was a big news story a few years back where parents in Iceland wanted to name, I believe it was that they wanted to name a baby girl Blair, which means breeze or something. But Blair is a masculine noun in Iceland, so the government wouldn't allow it because the child was female.
I've heard of this before. I hadn't heard about this particular case, though. I wonder if there's a way to feminize in Icelandic that would have made it acceptable.
That I don't know. Yeah.
Not that they should be forced to do that. I'm just, curious.
Right.
Blair, Blaer. It means light breeze. Oh, apparently the decision got overturned.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Since you've looked at this, do you notice that there are some countries or pockets of the country where family names are more important to pass on?
Oh, like as first names?
Yeah.
So anecdotally, I always had that impression in the South.
That would be my guess.
That's
but
just my association. Mm-hmm. Like it was more likely. I grew up in Texas, and I knew kids at least whose middle names were their mother's maiden name.
Oh, that's very Mexican too.
Actually, and also very British. So my family,
there's just
that
a
was
lot
the
of
tradition.
that out there. Yeah,
yeah, that was some tradition. But my parents decided not to go with that tradition anymore because they just, I don't know, they were kind of non-traditional, I guess. But yeah, it's common, I think, in lots of different cultures to do that. And I guess in the United States, maybe depending on which country your family originated from, you may or may not continue to do it.
It occurs to me, I don't know of any research on middle names, and that could be actually pretty interesting because I feel like middle names is just like a whole Wild West. It's like, they don't really get used much. You hardly ever see them except on like really official documents. So it's like people could go kind of wild, but I'm not sure that they do. I feel like growing up, I knew a whole lot of people whose middle name was either Marie or Lee or something. Like there was
Anne.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very small fixed set.
And the only time we really hear about people's middle names is if they're a serial killer, and that's only to distinguish them from all other people with the same name.
That's so funny.
Or like there are people in Hollywood who will use their middle initial because they also have to distinguish themselves from the other Michael Fox or whatever.
Right.
In SAG. So, but middle names are interesting. And I do know people without any middle names at all. And that also gets them kind of in trouble because it's kind of expected in North American culture, but they're not necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
And Harry S. Truman does not have a middle name. His middle name was just S, right? Like he just made that up as a president because he felt he needed one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you're not supposed to put a period afterwards because it's not an abbreviation.
That's
it's
right.
Just S.
That's a good point of punctuation trivia.
I just found this out like a couple of weeks ago. So.
I had this thought the other night. I wonder if anybody has ever used a middle initial of a letter that is also a Roman numeral and then insisted that like, no, my middle initial is not V, it's 5.
Ah,
I bet there exists
Why
someone.
not?
Might try that on the next kid.
Experimentation through having children.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But yeah, you mentioned surnames as first names, and that from reading the blog associated with the baby name wizard was something that I think she noticed had been on the rise, definitely. I mean, to take an example at random, I definitely noticed when there were a bunch of little Mackenzies starting, like that started to be a thing. I hadn't known anyone with my last name as their first name until I think it was about high school when this started happening for me.
Oh, and I have the opposite since my last name's not Mackenzie. But I always thought that was a first name. So when I see it as a last name, I'm like, oh.
Yes.
Okay.
When I started seeing it as a first name, I was like, I had it first.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of interesting things are happening with names too, because people are, I don't know, coming to terms with it or deciding for themselves that you don't have to name a child with the father's last name too. So a lot of different things are happening with that too. Like I feel like it's a really interesting time for names. So I grew up with a lot of girls who names were like Alexandra or Samantha, and they would go by Alex and Sam. I'm seeing those just becoming names for girls now. Like, just naming your child Sam or Alex. Which I think is pretty cool.
Well, technically, my name is a diminutive of Carolyn or Caroline.
Yes.
But I was named Carrie.
Yes.
Like, that is
nicknames
my name.
can sort of take on a life of their own.
I don't know. I think that there is still some societal expectations that a Sam or an Alex is perhaps more masculine coded too. So to see that these nicknames being first names for baby girls is interesting to me.
Right. Yeah.
The shift.
So the question is, does the gender shift ever go the other way? Do we ever find feminine coded names being given to baby boys?
Not that I'm
Women
aware
so
of.
much.
So the closest we can get is names like Noah and Jonah ending in an which is in many English names a feminine ending, because a lot of them come from Latin and other Romance languages, I think. But those are biblical names. They're not feminine coded, even though they sound, a little bit feminine. I mean, they don't even.
Yeah, and I think it's because they're biblical, where they just would never shift in that way, because unless we everyone stopped reading the Bible for 100 years or something, and then maybe.
I suspect, that other biblical names like Rebecca has really plummeted since the 80s and 90s. I mean, obviously Mary was the number one name given to baby girls until the 1970s. And in 2017, it was down to number 126.
Wow. So now's maybe the time.
To bring back the biblical names?
To use Mary for a girl child that, it's going to be somewhat unique, maybe? She'll
probably be the only one in her class. Yeah,
maybe.
It's possible. I think another reason I was always so interested in this was because my mom was an elementary school teacher, and for about 20 years, and every year she was coming home with, you can't imagine the new names in my class this year.
When I was growing up, it was a lot of Jennifers. So many Jennifers.
Yep. Yeah, Jennifer was number one in the 70s and 80s.
When I was growing up, you could sort of tell, so I'm from Canada, and you could sort of tell if a boy had come from the more Ontario area or more from the British Columbia area. So there were a lot of Daves from Ontario and a lot of Mikes from British Columbia.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like pinpointing where someone is from based on their accent.
Yeah, kind of.
It's this linguistic hallmark that you get stamped with depending on when and where and sort of what culture you're from.
Yes. I think this has been of interest to a lot of people recently because of Hasan Minhaj. Am I saying his name right, Carrie?
I think
I said it right, because I've been saying it Hassan for so long, but then he corrected Ellen, so it was Hassan, having that whole viral thing where he talked to Ellen about his name, and it was like, listen, my parents named me this, so this is how you're going to say it, right? But I think there has been some interest, at least looking at Twitter and the vocal fries and what people will tag us in, that people are really interested in how we can be assholes about names. Which I think is great, because it's not like suddenly people, it's possible to be an asshole about names. It's been possible the whole time, but now people really seem to care and want to know how not to be an asshole about it.
Yes. Yeah, there's some good literature on this in education and in linguistic anthropology about teachers and students' feelings when they're basically, the term is indexically bleached or racial ethnically bleached by teachers, just either butchering their name pronunciation, not trying to get the pronunciation right, or even just renaming the kid entirely. Oh, I can't say your name. You're Jeff now.
All right, listen up, y'all. I'm y'all's substitute teacher, Mr. Garvey. I taught school for 20 years in the inner city, so don't even think about messing with me. Y'all feel me? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a roll here. Jay Quellen. Where's Jay Quellen at?
It's so ridiculous to think that one population or demographic of people have normal names. They're the only ones with quote unquote normal names. It's just so absurd to think that. But I think a lot of us get stuck in our little bubble And not that you're meaning to be an asshole. It's just so easy to get stuck in that idea that, well, of course my name is normal. Why is your name so strange?
I know. Yeah, but it's like accents, right? You don't realize you have one. You think everybody else does.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a really good analogy.
So there's many ways that ethnicity or race can be coded by names, but I think Black names in the United States are particularly noticeable to white people. And so is there like any interesting research on those, and like how can we tell white people to be less of an asshole about that stuff?
Yeah.
Let's see. So the research that I know Stanley Lieberson, again, the name guy, has research looking at distinctive African American names and when they sort of came into being. And he actually found that they correlated really well with the civil rights movement and sort of the Black Pride movement. People started becoming more likely to actually make names up entirely or use variations on existing names. And that was where Black naming practices and white naming practices, we can really see them diverge quantitatively. The flip side to sort of names are like accents is that the fact that accent discrimination exists means that name discrimination exists, right? And so there have also been studies that have sent out identical resumes with traditionally Black names and traditionally white names and found fewer callbacks to the resume with the Black name than the traditionally white name, just like we find linguistic profiling, the work of John Baugh, who called up a bunch of different real estate agents with speaking mainstream American English or African American English or Chicano English and got different amounts of callbacks depending on the accent he was using, right? So there's a parallel for any sociolinguistic study about discrimination in names, it seems.
Someone once told me that I was lucky to have my last name because surely that helped me with my resume. Like if people saw my resume, and I was like, God. No, I'm sorry, that's very offensive to say that to someone. Like you can think it, sure, but keep it to yourself. But also, that's not how it works. Not yet.
I mean, maybe there's like one job where that might work for you, but generally, no.
Well, there was one time where I was told I did AmeriCorps, and the man who was Mexican American, he's like, I saw your name, I looked at your statement about like your story with Spanish, and he was like, you're gonna be able to connect with these kids. Like that's I think a very good thing that will happen, but for the most part, a name like my last name, unconsciously to a lot of people or consciously, is not going to do as well as Smith. But yeah, so my point there is that a lot of people, well-meaning people, do not know that. They really think it's changed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I know a lot of white people are living in a fantasy. Maybe less so now. The last 3 years maybe hopefully woke some of them up, but I think a lot of white people were living in a fantasy of a post-racial world.
Yeah it's interesting. There's the one line of research on this sort of like, call it kind of overt discrimination of names, but there's another interesting paper I found a while back by a researcher named LaTanya Sweeney. It's called Discrimination in Online Ad Delivery. And what she did is she tried Googling a bunch of different names, so more traditionally Black-coded names and white-coded names, and seeing what sort of ads Google offered her up. And she was finding when you Google a Black name like LaTanya, you are more likely to get ads for arrest records than if you Google, a more white-coded name like Emily. Yep. So it'll say like, LaTanya, has she been arrested? Click here to find out. Which you're not getting when you search for Emily, for instance. My God.
I should not be shocked, but I actually am.
I am too, because I thought you were going to say like maybe some like some black hair products or something very, very, like that you could buy.
That's where my brain went too.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. That could be productive, but this is just like, algorithms are racist too.
Oh, yes. Well, we've talked about that before, and yes, they are.
Because they're created by humans who are racist.
There you go.
And misogynistic and all this.
So speaking of that connection there, so there was also a guy who was talking about sending out resumes, and his name is Kim. And he had to change his resume to Mr. Kim whatever because he wasn't getting callbacks. So there's also sexist.
Yeah, there's another study that I think it was published in Science or Nature. The researchers sent out resumes for a lab manager position that were either, I think, John or Jennifer or something like that. And experienced that same sort of thing. 538, the website, had they had an article a few years back, how to guess somebody's age when all you know is their name, and they combine name statistics and actuarial tables to basically include, like, okay, if your name peaked around, the 1930s, you're likely to live X number of years. If you meet a John, they're probably from this era or so.
Yeah, I loved that. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things that they've done.
It's just remarkable having never, once you realize that names can be pinpointed to an era with such accuracy, to then think about the next level of, like, how on earth does that happen? How do these things really go through those sort of chronological waves when unlike, and this is something that Lieberson points out, unlike fashion, we don't have magazines telling us, like, name your kid Rebecca now. It's the trendy 80s thing to do. Everyone else is doing it.
That's a good
point. But somehow we pick it up. Yeah. Yeah, but it's like, that's how innovations in language progress too. Nobody goes around saying, oh, it's the trendy thing nowadays to say yeah instead of everyone else in Michigan is doing it. But it happens.
But it's true. Like, I think baby name books existed back then, but it's nothing like today where it's like baby name generator or all these websites that you can, like, look at, or, yet still you see these trends.
That's a good point. Yeah, so that's a good point. So has, like, anything changed as a result that now that we have more information at our fingertips, or is it still the same?
Game of Thrones names. That's a change.
Well, yeah.
That's
true.
Yeah,
Daenerys.
But, like, celebrity names, that's always been a possibility, right? So there's, like, a little Shirley peak for Shirley Temple back in the 30s or 40s. You can see presidential bumps. Franklin for the Roosevelt bump, and I think there's a little Herbert bump around Herbert Hoover that you can see in the data. Yeah. So Game of Thrones names for that, they're not that different there, I guess.
That's true.
Yeah, but the question of, like, the way information is just more available to us now than it used to be, is that changing naming? And I don't know.
Because what you might maybe expect is, okay, I see that this is on the rise. I don't want to join. Whereas you couldn't really do that before because you didn't have that much information. But I don't know if that's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
So again, along with that kind of access to information, I'm again reminded of people caring more about being right, trying hard to be right about people's names, and caring that that's a very personal part of someone. What are some of the biggest ways you would say that there are to be assholes about names? Like, what is it? Besides, okay, so we talked about perhaps this is happening unconsciously, but, like, seeing someone's last name and thinking maybe they're not as qualified or they're more likely to have been arrested. Okay, so that's one asshole thing.
Yeah, so snap social judgments about somebody's character or personality or interests or even, language abilities or anything based on their name.
Yes. That well, that feels very personal because I'm at Verizon. I tell the person my name. Okay, gave them my last name. He was Mexican American. He's like, "Oh, you're Mexican too. You speak Spanish then?" It's like, "No." Yeah. So Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But, and also, of course, it's not even without a foreign language, right? Or foreign or another language. It could be with Black names, people can be assholes and assume that their English isn't as good because we have these assumptions about African American English.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So just like opinions and attitudes toward people seep into attitudes toward people's language, the same thing happens with people's names. Yeah. So there's that aspect. There's the aspect of sort of perception of traits based on a name, but then there's also the production aspect. So how do you pronounce somebody's name when they ask you to pronounce it, right? And I know you talked about this in the episode when you had Zach Jaggers on, former colleague of mine from NYU.
Y'all are doing good stuff over there.
I know. Yeah. I know. It's a great place to be. There's actually a poster down the hall from me on which Zach was the first author and other colleagues here at NYU were co-authors. And it's called What It Means When You Say My Name Right, Subjective Evaluations of the Linguistic Reproduction of Names. So Zach and his collaborators did an online study where listeners heard audio clips in which a conversation participant either accurately or inaccurately reproduced the other conversation participant's name. So one person says, "Hi, my name is Natalia." and the other person either says, "Oh, hi, Natalia," or "Oh, hi, Natalie," or Natalia, or something very anglicized. And then they asked subjects' opinions of the person who repeated the name. Are they? Do you think they're working class or middle class? Do you think they're likely to vote Republican or conservative? Do you think they're intelligent? Do you think they're friendly? And so forth, and had people rate them on a number of different metrics. And accurate reproductions of a name, whether it was either Anglo or not, were rated more sociable, more friendly, more polite, more cooperative, and listeners were more likely to want to be friends with those people who accurately reproduce names. So it's the nice thing to do. Listen to people when they tell you how they say their name and do your best to reproduce it.
Yes, do your best. Some are easier than others. Natalia is not that hard for an English speaker. There are other names that are harder.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, in my experience, people are reasonable. They understand that, their name has a sound in it that is hard for English speakers, and they will often give you an alternative. If you can't say the da, say it like a da, but please don't say it like a ra.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find even this from my own experience with a name that is not phonologically difficult to other people, they often just seem to listen to the first part when I say my name and tune out the rest of it. So I just, I say, "Hi, I'm Laurel." "Oh, hi, Lauren," as if they had just stopped listening after the first syllable.
That's what's happening with me too. I didn't realize it. I actually thought it was just like I was pronouncing it funny, or like I wasn't being clear enough. But no, they're not paying attention.
I wonder if that's part of it. Mm-hmm.
No, I gotta say though that I get really anxious when I meet people for the first time. It's getting better with age. That I can see tuning out on like the second half of a name, or just like not even getting the name the first time.
Well, I've definitely said the name wrong to someone because I've misheard it. I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
Like, as long as they correct you and you.
But it's a pattern.
Oh, sorry,
it's a pattern for you both. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
I don't really care. Like, if it's a person that I'm going to talk to more than once in my life, I want them to get my name right. If it's a Starbucks person, I don't care.
It's true. Yeah. Although some of the Starbucks people care so much. They must get.
No, they do.
You know why though? And it makes me sad. It's probably because they get so much shit from people.
They do get a lot of shit. Yeah. And that's why I don't want to be an asshole about it. I'm just like, it's fine. Karen's fine.
Yeah.
But,
But, like, they could also just call out order numbers. Yeah. Do they really need to do names?
Well, so this is a corporate decision, right? Because they want to humanize.
It's not the barista's fault.
Yeah.
Say, I don't know if it's true elsewhere or what the major company is for Safeway. I know that Fry's is Kroger, but Safeway here in Arizona, they have a company policy where they say the last name on the person's card. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's so stressful for me every time, especially like when I'm with my dad, who says it always with the Spanish pronunciation. And then like, I remember as a kid, he would say that and they wouldn't understand. And it was like one of those just awkward moments. And I just hated it, but at a certain point he had decided that like, he didn't care, like he was going to do it no matter what. And like, I'm at that point too, where I can see why, when you get to that point, it's like freeing. But as a kid, I was like, oh, we're having one of those moments again, Yeah.
And see, that policy is extra problematic because you need a title in addition to the last name, right? So then I get, thanks, Miss Mackenzie. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, same. So I also have a problem with my last name. So Gillen is just like Dylan, but for some reason everyone wants to pronounce it Gillian.
No.
So again, I don't really care if it's someone I don't know, but if like we're going to know each other from more than like one interaction,
Actually, Carrie, with your last name, I had the GIF problem. I wasn't sure whether you were Gillen or Jillian.
Yes.
But not Jillian, right? It was,
No, that one I was, I could tell. There wasn't another I in there. But this just goes to show that, like, I mean, yes, there can be idiosyncratic pronunciations. You don't know whether someone says their name with the French pronunciation, the English pronunciation. It's like, just ask. Ask people how to pronounce their names. Exactly. And, just 2 days ago, we got an email from NYU saying, we have now made it possible for students to enter their name pronunciations into the student system.
Perfect.
Yes.
But that should have been earlier.
It should have been earlier, and I won't be entirely happy until everybody knows IPA.
Yes,
and they can actually enter it in IPA. Because, I mean, it's great to get pronunciations, but if they're not in IPA, I'm not going to be able, you really know how to say them.
I totally get it.
I mean, especially if it's not English, right? Like, you're like, Yeah, so...
That makes sense to you, but...
We have the same problem, so we say, like, if if you want us to pronounce your name correctly, can you please give us, like, if it's not obvious from the spelling, can you give us a pronunciation guide? And so a lot of people don't know the IPA, so they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's, you shouldn't apologize. But also, I don't know.
I know.
My best guess. I do my best guess.
Yeah. I know. I get so nervous. I get so nervous pronouncing people's names on this podcast, even when I ask them before, and then we start recording, and I'm like, this is so important. Like, I've gotten better, but it's like, because interviewing gets easier, everything gets easier, but it's like, the name just feels so heavy and important still. It's like the one thing, okay, we're going to respect this in the most perfect pronunciation that I can possibly do. But yeah, so I don't know. It's great to talk about names. I could talk all day about names. I'm just like realizing how many stories I have about my name, and I know that everyone has tons of stories about their name.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of them happy, some of them quite discriminatory. Like there's all these things.
It's this funny thing that we didn't choose our names, and yet we're basically stuck with them unless we want to jump through a fair amount of hoops.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point too, though. We should really make it easier for people to legally change their name. I know it's such a mess.
Considering that for a long, long time, and women are still doing it, women were expected to change their last names. We still make it very hard for women to do that. All things considered, that was like the norm for so long. It still is, technically.
But like the money involved, like I remember my friend changed their name, and it was like, we all had a little get together party for it, because it was like a big deal, because not only is it legally hard, but they had to like get money for it, and like, there was some fundraising involved. It's just like, it shouldn't cost emotionally and financially like it does.
And it also has implications for voting later.
Yeah.
Because every time the Republicans make it harder to vote, often it affects anyone who's changed their name.
Yeah, because of just the IDs they have, you mean? They won't match? Yeah. Well, universities are getting a lot better, at least I can say that. Working at University of Arizona, it's much easier to put which name you would like to have on your ID. That will show up with the professors or any of your TAs. They'll see that name.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah.
It's a small thing to do, but it's big, because you actually realize how hard it was. Yeah, how important it was or is. So, yeah. Are there any other big ways that? Well, okay. Here's the opposite question. How can we not be assholes? So you said, okay, just be kind and ask people how to pronounce their name. Are there any other advice you have?
Don't make snap judgments by names. Call people what they want to be called, and how they want to be called how they want it pronounced. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up with names.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple. It could be.
Right?
It could be if you wanted it to, right?
Why is it hard?
I mean, I think it's mostly simple, as long as people don't want to be assholes. It's just like, we get anxious when we don't know how to pronounce a name. That's the only thing that makes it kind of emotionally hard.
Yeah.
And we should recognize that. But other than that, I think it's very easy.
Yeah. And I totally, as someone who is an anxious person, I totally get it.
Yeah.
There's got to be
too.
Yeah. Got to be some room to forgive yourself for it. Because it's harder when you make a big deal about it after, right? You're like, just like, you don't want to make the person uncomfortable by being like, I'm so sorry, I'm the worst,
Right. Just like, remember with Kirby's episode when we talked about using the wrong pronoun. Don't go like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Just be like, oh, sorry.
And then we move on.
Make the change.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, name spelling is also something that is very variable, right? There's Elizabeths with an S and with a Z. And that's another thing where, make a good faith effort to get it right. But it's not the end of the world. As a Mackenzie who has an A in the last name, I get Mackenzie without an A a lot.
Yeah.
And
just try.
You correct it and you move on.
Except if you spell Megan with an H, I will kill you. Just kidding.
I'm going to send you a box full of Megan with an H coffee mugs.
Are you going to do it with a Sharpie? Take the H out? Just because extra.
Yes. All I could find. Hope it was good enough.
Oh, how funny.
Oh, well, this has been so fun.
So
Thank you so much for
this has been great.
coming to talk to us.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Well, Shall we say, don't be an asshole?
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Thank you.
So, as of right now, we have 2 patrons to thank for this month. I'd like to thank Jamar Brown and Shelby Greenwood.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I love all of you so much.
Heart eyes, motherfucker. Yeah, so if you want to join us on Patreon, you can at patreon.com/vocalfriespod. We do bonus episodes for the $5 level, and everyone from the $3 level and the $5 level gets stickers. The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.